What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of That Dynasty Show. I am your host, Mike Ostrowski, joined by my co-host, Tyler Beck, who actually has a really cool set of data that he wanted to go over today. So, Tyler, go ahead and take us away, man.
Yeah, I enjoyed looking into this one. It all kind of started with a question, we all know who the best quarterbacks to have on your dynasty team are, right? It's the top five, top 10 is pretty easy and well known, but I was just kind of wondering, what quarterbacks do you want your receivers to play for? And so we went through and kind of just added up all the points and found out where those elite guys were. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. Let's see how I do that.
I can do it if you want me to. I have it open.
Oh, you have it open? All right, cool.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. Oh, that's the wrong one. Here we go. There we go.
All right, yeah. So if you want to just zoom into probably just the names and then to the total per game, that's all we need to see for right now. Probably a little bit more because it might come up smaller on the YouTube. All right, yeah, that works. All right, so as we look here, you can see we went through and we found this is based off PPR, right? So points off completions, points off yards, points off touchdowns, their total divided by the amount of games they played. And then we found out how many starting and how many elite options they had. So if we had a player like Lamar Jackson, we actually took his stats from the previous season and put those in because I thought they would be a little bit more representative to what we can expect out of him and his arm. So, Mikey, if you want to just scroll down and to the right so we can look at our definitions and categories for starting and elite options, right? And then it should be down underneath that, right? All right, so starting options are, any top 24 point per game wide receiver, any running back who is top 12 total in receiving yards the entire season, or any top 12 point per game tight end, right? Some of the elite options are any top 12 point per game receiver, and then again, any top 12 receiving yard running back, or any top 6 point per game tight end. So when we look at this chart, right, this section right here, we can see that there is literally only one football team good idea. There's only one football team that was able to produce more than one top 12 point per game wide receiver, and that was the Buccaneers offense with Tom Brady. So it kind of makes me wonder how are we supposed to feel about guys like Devonta Smith or guys like Jalen Waddle and things like that, where they're now the number two in their offenses and they're not behind. They're not in these offenses that are producing wide receiver points, In fact, when you look down, I mean, there's really a huge gap. Once you get down below 12, most of the guys who are considered starting and elite options really are mostly tight ends. The elite options like Cordell Patterson ended up for Matt Ryan, right? Because he was really a receiver playing running back. That's a little crazy. Then we see almost none all the way down until you get to Davis Mills, Tua, right, Zach Wilson. And Zach Wilson had Ty Johnson sneak in as a top 12 receiving running back as well. So it's almost like I feel guilty almost even counting that. But so, Mikey, if you want to scroll up just to the averages so you can see where the
Ty Johnson was in the top 12 for running back receiving yards.
Yes, total.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's wild, right? But so you look at, I mean, big gap between Brady and Herbert, even, right? Just from number one and number two. Brady's in his own tier up here alone, right? A 6-point gap per game. Justin Herbert was able to produce 3 starting options between Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and Austin Eckler. But only one of those guys was in lead option. So if you're someone who thinks that Mike Williams has a wide receiver one ceiling, it's going to be tough for him to get there unless Keenan Allen steps out of that role. And same thing for even Dak was surprising. His elite option, it was not CeeDee Lamb, it was not Amari Cooper, and in fact, Amari Cooper was barely even considered a starting option. His elite option was what's his name, Dalton Schultz, right? It was a top 6 point per game tight end. We look at these guys, and it just kind of makes me wonder, like, like how high hopes can we have for these guys that aren't even the number one target in their own offense? I'm now thinking about guys like even almost DJ Moore with Baker Mayfield, right? Like Baker Mayfield had no starting and no elite options last year at all. I'm looking at guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown. He might be falling down my list a little bit. Because I mean, you look at the mediocre quarterbacks who even have good weapons, right? They're not producing elite options. You had Jimmy Garoppolo produce Debo, right? It's just they're few and far between, if you ask me. So it's like even you look at Lamar Jackson right now, I'm questioning like, do I want Rashad Bateman on my team? You know, Tua's all the way down here at the bottom. Like, do you really want Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill, who we think maybe Miami could commit to Tua for a while, right? Zach Wilson, do I want to commit myself to Garrett Wilson, knowing that Zach Wilson's going to be there for the next couple of years? The one who's really, really just god awful and just a tier below the rest, had to put him in his own tier, and it was Brown. You can guess why, right? Was Justin Fields, right? So I mean, Justin Fields was 30. What is that? 38 points per game, 38.8 points produced.
38.8.
That's I think that's literally half of what Tom Brady put out last year. So if you're looking at Darnell Mooney, you might be better off looking at Russell Gage to put up points on for your roster, considering Tom Brady put up an elite season for Antonio Brown last year by points per game basis, for Mike Evans, for Chris Godwin, Gronk, and Leonard Fournette. All five of those guys ended up either top 12 or Gronk was top 6 points per game. So these numbers are just really skewed, really skewed. Once you get outside of the top 12 with Kyler Murray, you just almost, I mean, the numbers just severely, severely drop off. I don't know if you see anything jarring, but I think it's something that we can use going forward. If I was caught, like I said, if I was caught between Devonta Smith and Rashad Bateman right now, I'm looking down at Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts all the way down here, almost at the bottom of the list. And it's like, well, I don't even know if I really want either of them on my squad at this point. You know, it's like I might be looking to move both of them.
Yeah, I think the most helpful thing that you are able to extrapolate here is column G, which is the total points per game that this quarterback is getting those weapons. So Tom Brady, I mean, theoretically speaking, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Leonard Fournette, obviously Gronk is no longer there. But even that, it's a lot of mouths to feed. But when you see just how many points Tom Brady was firing off to his receiving options last year, it becomes a lot less concerning owning a piece of that, right? Because a lot of people will argue against Mike Evans or against Chris Godwin purely for the fact that they're splitting time with one of those other guys. But clearly here you can see it doesn't really matter. Same thing like you mentioned with Justin Herbert. You know, we have Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler, but those two receivers coexist perfectly fine. Same thing with Joe Burrow. You know, we have our starting options here. I would imagine T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are both of those two options if I had to guess. You know, he is number 6 overall on this list for giving out those points. So this, if anything, makes me love T. Higgins even more, right? Because it just shows that there's tons of points to go around on this offense. I do think Kyler Murray is the biggest surprise here, right? I knew Kyler Murray was a great quarterback to own for fantasy football, but I was very surprised to see that he was putting up over 61 points a game for his, targets. Do you remember any of the data with Kyler Murray off the top of your head?
I know that I want to say Zach Ertz was one of them. I can go back and
Definitely, yeah. Ertz was like a top 5 tight end last year.
I mean, it was on a points per game basis, so some of these things you would actually really be surprised at. Like, I think I assumed that who was it? I assumed somebody was like was a top 6 points per game tight end, and I was actually wrong. Or I think I assumed it was Josh Allen, and I was wrong. I don't remember who it actually ended up being. But I know Dallas Goedert. I think he was also outside of the top 6.
Helps
I
that
think
helps that Kyler Murray had both Chase Edmonds and James Conner too, I'm sure.
yeah, that as well because he had two running backs too out of the backfield. But I mean, those are still points to be had, and I mean, we kind of compare him a lot to Lamar Jackson. But we see now, I mean, based on these stats, Kyler Murray is much better for his receivers, much healthier to have as a quarterback for your receivers than Lamar Jackson. And I think another big difference, right, is Baker Mayfield down to Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold's not even on your screen right now, right? And I mean, they came from the same draft class, right? One could argue that Baker's been in a better spot than Sam Darnold, but I think this might look things up for DJ Moore and even CMC in some ways. I mean, the Baker Mayfield has thrown twice as many touchdowns in the same span as Sam Darnold has, and Sam Darnold hasn't been in a bad spot in Carolina. I mean, granted, it wasn't what Cleveland built for Baker for those couple of years, but I mean, we're going to see them on an even playing field, and maybe that'll change the data. But for now, I think we can bump DJ Moore up a couple spots. At least I am, right?
I mean, it's about time you're giving DJ Moore the respect he deserves. Let's be real here. But no, seriously. And the other thing with Baker Mayfield, too, is these are the 2021 numbers, right? This is just numbers from last season. Okay. So we know that Baker Mayfield was basically playing half the season with a torn labrum. He obviously should not have been playing last year because he did look like dog dirt. But he was also missing OBJ, especially after, I mean, they ended up trading him anyway, but didn't really have much going from Kareem Hunt last year. Jarvis Landry was his best receiver, followed by DPJ, and I honestly couldn't even tell you who their third receiver was. He really didn't have a lot going for him, honestly, last year. And in years prior, especially in 2020, when he took the Browns to the playoffs and almost to the Super Bowl, I imagine his numbers would be even higher than they are right here. So, I mean, with a healthy Baker, I would be extremely excited for DJ Moore. I would be extremely excited for a potential Robbie Anderson bounce back. Robbie Anderson is basically free, and 2 years ago he had 1,000-yard season. And then obviously, like you said, with CMC. So the entire Carolina Panthers fantasy options, I mean, all of them are definitely getting a nice little bonus from going from Sam Darnold to Baker Mayfield. I want to know your take on this, though. So Ben Roethlisberger at 13 overall here, actually really surprising. I guess Deontay Johnson carried a lot of it, and then Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris as well.
Yeah, so you look at it, and a lot of his points came from completions. I think he had the second highest amount of completions in the league behind it. Or maybe those like top five. I think
Pretty high,
he's
yeah,
got 390.
390.
Yeah, so a lot of that came from completions, and also his touchdown numbers weren't terrible in respect to like the really bad guys. Like you would expect him to be down near like Drew Lock and things like that. But his touchdown numbers were actually like well above that. I guess a little bit below average, but still better than what I think you thought we were getting out of Ben Roethlisberger this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, how is this? Because obviously Deontay Johnson has a big following, right? Everybody loves Deontay Johnson, or a lot of people do. He was a top 10 wide receiver last year in PPR, top 12, one of those two. And he kind of had himself a breakout year. And he's kind of one of those really polarizing receivers in Dynasty football right now. He's going, if I remember correctly, in the same echelon as like Michael Pittman, Drake London. And Deontay Johnson has proven to be a top 10 wide receiver already, and those other guys haven't. I wonder how much it changes for Pittsburgh going from Ben Roethlisberger to Kenny Pickett. Like I don't see a world where Kenny Pickett is supporting 56 points each week for his receiver options. That to me doesn't seem like that's going to happen, at least in year one.
No, I think at most we see down near like the Carson Wentz, Ryan Tannehill range, like 50 to 49 ish, right? But at the same time, I think that the yards per catch for Deontay are gonna go up. I think that Kenny Pickett can get the ball down the field better than 58-year-old Ben Roethlisberger. So I think over the course of the next 2 years, I do think that Kenny Pickett will be an improvement from what Ben Roethlisberger was at the very tail end. But yeah, a lot of points for Ben came from his completions, and I mean, you look at the guys who have 390 completions. Most of them are up in like the top 5, 6, 7 of the quarterbacks by points produced for the receivers. Almost all of them. There's only one guy outside of one or two outside of the top five that have at least 390. So
Yeah, I mean, I do. This data that you pulled is really, really fascinating. Honestly, this is really cool stuff. So let's do this. Let's go through kind of tier by tier. We'll put Tom Brady in the top tier, with Herbert through Stafford there. And let's just talk about one guy in each tier that could see an increase and one guy that could see somewhat of a fairly significant decrease this year. Looking at the first tier, obviously, we don't expect any of those numbers to really go up by too much. Asking anything more than 67 points for their receiving options per game is just getting a little greedy on our part. But if you had to guess of these top five guys, which one do you think is going to fall the furthest on this list this year?
um I think we could easily see Pat Mahomes honestly fall into the Aaron Rodgers, Josh Allen, Kirk Cousins conversation. It wouldn't surprise me if Tyreek Hill was benefiting Pat Mahomes or was generating 4 or 5 fantasy points on his own, that Pat Mahomes wouldn't have been producing without him. So I think it might be unpopular, but Pat Mahomes, and then even probably Dak Prescott. I mean, that's probably the easy one. He's the one that's losing Amari Cooper. And then I think Matt Stafford's probably the easy one to burst up and maybe even be in that Tom Brady category. It wouldn't surprise me to see Cam Akers be top 12 in receiving yards if you got that kind of volume, plus Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson. And then, I mean, who knows with Tyler Higbee isn't like a slouch at tight end. He's a consistent, like, low end tight end too. Who knows? He could easily sneak into the top 10 and be like a starting option. So I think Matt Stafford could pop up. And I think Dak and Mahomes definitely could take a step down.
Yeah, I agree with both of those takes. I mean, you had me going until you said Cam Akers would have top 12 receiving yards as a running back.
He could. I mean, if they get that kind of, I mean, like I said, if he gets that kind of volume, I mean, I don't see. I think Darrell Henderson did a good job at everything he did last year, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him get a really big workload. But again, these weren't based on per game stats. That for the running backs, it was just based on total receiving yards. So.
Yeah, I just hate Cam Akers, honestly.
I don't like Cam Akers either. I'm just saying. I mean, I think I just really like Matt Stafford. I mean, it's not like I'm gonna die on a hill for Leonard Fournette at 27, 28 years old. But I mean, this year on a competing roster, since he has Tom Brady, I might be more inclined to do so.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I'll agree. Matt Stafford in this tier. I think Matt Stafford and Justin Herbert. I would say are the only two guys on this entire list that could unseat Tom Brady for that number one spot. I think Pat Mahomes is going down. I think Dak Prescott is going down because neither one of their situations got better this year. They both got worse in the offseason. Losing Tyreek Hill and Amari Cooper is a really big deal. So I would say Herbert and Stafford are the only two people, not just in this tier, but on this entire list that have the potential to unseat Tom Brady. When we get into that next tier, I don't think Joe Burrow is going to fall. I think he's going to stay right in between that like 62 to 65 points per game range for his wide receivers. But I will say that was probably Joe Burrow's ceiling for what he's going to deal out to his wide receivers. I mean, between Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, there were multiple 40-point plus weeks for both of those guys. And he had a pretty good rapport with CJ Uzoma last year. Maybe he kind of hooks up with Hayden Hurst a little bit this year, but I imagine his tight end production is going to go down this year. And it's pretty much, I mean, we know it. It's just the T. Higgins, Jamar Chase show. So I think that's probably about his ceiling. I don't see a very high probability of Joe Burrow creeping up into the top 5 on this list.
I think
Josh,
I might
Josh,
disagree with you
oh,
on
go
Joe
ahead.
Burrow. I'm gonna have to cut you off and disagree with you on Joe Burrow, only because I think that the offensive line in Cincinnati can get a lot better. I think that could easily propel him to be in the Justin Herbert range. I mean, it's really not far off. I mean, he was 400 yards and I mean 5 touchdowns away from
Yeah,
being in
but
that Justin Herbert Dak Prescott.
Yeah, but that's the thing though. I mean, he had 4,600 yards and 34 touchdowns. I mean, that's a really big year. Like I understand with the 17th game being added on, we are going to see more quarterbacks have that illustrious 5,000 yard season, and we might see 5,000 yards from Joe Burrow at some point in his career. But I mean, you can't underrate the 34 touchdowns either. Like it's very rare to see quarterbacks have those 45 plus seasons. It's even rare just to see them go over that 35 or 36 mark. Like 34 touchdowns for Joe Burrow was really really good. And I mean, I will admit there's definitely a possibility of Joe Burrow getting better, but I would assume that this is probably pretty damn close to his ceiling because his 2021 was a fantastic year.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely I agree with you. But I mean, I think also almost like, I mean, point to make is like what players do we think this is going to benefit? I mean, when you look at the gold tier, who comes off the top of your mind as some skill guys, some either running backs, tight ends, receivers, anybody in that conversation? Who do you think might be benefiting just out of the gold tier? We'll start at the gold tier.
Well, Chris Godwin for sure. He's been so criminally underrated this offseason. And this just, I mean, Chris Godwin was the top 6 wide receiver before he got injured last year. I will scream praise for Chris Godwin off the top of a mountaintop. And Tom Brady throwing for significantly by far the most points per game for his wide receivers. I mean, Chris Godwin's a screaming value. Justin Herbert, I feel like there's not anything there that we didn't already know or that we weren't already talking about at some point this offseason. Dak Prescott, we already know that CeeDee Lamb is going to be a beneficiary because of, Amari Cooper leaving and everything like that. I think the biggest thing to talk about is Pat Mahomes and trying to figure out who his top wide receiver is going to be and who's going to be a beneficiary there, right? And I think you and I would both agree that on this entire gold tier list, Juju Smith-Schuster probably has the most upside based off of his current value. Obviously, we know Pat Mahomes throws it a shit ton, throws it for a shit ton of yards, throws for a shit ton of touchdowns as well. And even though he is losing Tyreek Hill, and his numbers are definitely going to go down, right? Going from Tyreek Hill to Juju as your wide receiver one's a big step down. But yeah, I would say he's probably going to be the biggest beneficiary in that tier.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. If I had to name 3, Juju would be number 1, and then 2 would maybe be Allen Robinson. Number 3, I think sleeper would be Tony Pollard. Apparently there were reports coming out of OTAs that sorry, my dog's snoring in the corner, but apparently he was taking snaps out of the slot. And I think that could be a huge benefit for him. I mean, as a Cowboys fan, I want to see him get on the field more. And as a fantasy fan, putting him in the slot, I wouldn't be upset seeing that if I had him on my roster. He's not too expensive right now. I think that makes him even one of the more premium handcuffs if he starts taking snaps out there and seeing an even bigger snap share.
Yeah, I mean, it'll definitely be fun to see. I do think Tony Pollard does offer a ton of upside. Makes me a little upset for those people who still believe in Ezekiel Elliott. He's still a good running back, but it does seem about time that his volume starts to go down. And Tony Pollard is very good on third downs. So I don't disagree with any of those takes. I think Pollard and Robinson are both pretty safe bets too. Looking at this next tier, the obvious answer is whoever Aaron Rodgers decides to lock on to this year, right? We don't know who it's going to be. I would say the early favorites definitely Alan Lazard, could be Christian Watson. Randall Cobb has Aaron Rodgers trusts Randall Cobb with his life. So Randall Cobb could have some random ass emergent season. Romeo Dubs, a 4th or 5th round pick, I believe out of Nevada. He could come out of like it's anyone's guess, right? So when I'm looking at Green Bay's wide receiver room, I don't want to say I'm completely avoiding it, especially in dynasty formats, but I'm not paying the price for any of those guys right now because everyone is assuming that the guy they roster is going to be the guy for Aaron Rodgers this year. So if I have a Green Bay receiver, I'm just holding him. And if not, I'm not trying to acquire him because he's too damn expensive right now. So yeah, I would say the biggest beneficiary is going to be somewhere in Green Bay.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the low hanging fruit answer. But I mean, God knows who it's going to be. If you are so
The,
lucky.
the the real answer is just take Aaron Jones.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the thing is like, I was going to say exactly like almost along those lines, it's like the real beneficiary for this season is probably going to be one of the vets on the team that's been around. Those two running backs, and like you said, Randall Cobb. When I look at like Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, I think Hunter Renfro. I think of Adam Thielen. I mean, Joe Burrow. I mean, everyone thinks of T. Higgins. Um, I know a lot of people are high on Gabe Davis, and I guess this would. I'm just personally not. I guess this would be a reason to bump him up. I can't be biased in that regard. So I might even think one of the Buffalo running backs, out of the backfield. Maybe I bump them up, or maybe even thinking like Dawson Knox might be a guy that you might target, or even like Zach Ertz for Kyler Murray, or Irv Smith for Kirk Cousins, or you could pick any of those guys, and it's like if you have exposure to one of the guys from these elite quarterbacks, you have a chance at getting a top 24 or top 12 guy.
Yeah, and it's weird though, right? Because you always want to try to guess who's going to be the biggest beneficiary in the upcoming year. But then we also have to remember, okay, well, it's Dynasty. We need to make sure we're doing what's going to be best for the long term with our investments. But that's what you're getting with Derek Carr's weapons. That's what you're getting with Justin Jefferson. Not so much Adam Thielen because he's 31 or whatever. But that's always something to remember. It's very easy when you're looking at data like this to get trapped and really start being reactionary to recent numbers. And you don't want to do that in Dynasty, right? Obviously, it is very helpful tools, but you don't want to just completely commit to it because that's redraft essentially. But we'll go ahead. We'll move into this next tier here. Baker Mayfield, right? His beneficiaries, we already talked about them. They're very obvious, whether it's DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, C-Mac. Carolina's obviously going to be a big uptick. I am going to correct you here for a second. So Lamar Jackson only played in 12 games in 2021, not 14.
I used the 2020. I said that earlier. I used the 2020.
Oh, that's right. You did say that, and I apologize to you. I was just so excited because I wanted to bump Lamar Jackson up on this list. But no, I apologize for that. Jared Goff is actually a pleasant surprise.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, he was a shocker to me, actually.
I know you had mentioned that you were probably a little too high up on Amon-Ra before this. And I think when Jameson Williams comes into play and TJ Hawkinson's healthy and DeAndre Swift is healthy, if he's only throwing out for 55 points a game, then, I'd be worried basically for the entire offense. I think I know we're talking about beneficiaries right now, but going back to the other conversation of guys that could potentially rise, why can't Jared Goff enter in those 61 plus points per game for his receivers, especially when Jameson Williams is there? Jared Goff could actually be. I'm not buying him in Dynasty by any stretch of the imagination because there's a very good chance that he'll lose his job after this year unless Detroit goes out and gets pretty close to the playoffs. But I could see Jared Goff having a big leap on this list this year, as weird as it is to say.
I mean, I could see that too. I mean, you see, he's just loaded with weapons. I mean, you see the guy, like, nobody thinks, like, is there really that big of a talent difference between Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff? Um, I don't know how big that gap is, but I know I like Kirk Cousins' weapons probably a lot better than and his situation a lot better than what Jared Goff was thrown into, especially with when his best players were all hurt. I think it's worrisome for me because it's hard for me to imagine that TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift both take a back seat to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Granted, I mean, my ceiling for Amon-Ra St. Brown is a wide receiver too. I don't think he's ever going to be the dominant 20 point, 19 point per game guy that's top 10 every year. I mean, that's what I took him for, was to be a wide receiver too. But I mean, it's tough for me to imagine that Jared Goff is the guy who ends up producing the four starters and the two elite guys. I mean, it's tough for me to imagine that leap happening. Granted, he is young. We've seen him get to a Super Bowl, but that was with an absolutely loaded team that just went to the Super Bowl without him. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it. It could happen. I would be glad to see it happen, But I think it's probably more likely that Detroit moves on from Jared Goff and we get happy about something like that.
Yeah, I think so too. Like I said, I'm not buying him in Dynasty, but I'm not shying away from buying Detroit players in Dynasty, whether it's the rumors of a new quarterback or if Jared Goff's numbers here get better. There's a good short term upside and a good long term upside in Detroit with the potential QB shuffle. So honestly, not a bad room to be looking into. Right now, it seems like everybody is trying to buy DeAndre Swift. I mean, rightfully so. He's a top three, at worst, top five dynasty asset right now, largely in part to his PPR upside. And clearly, Detroit's going to support him like that. Going down the list a little bit, um, there's really not a lot of surprises here, to be honest. Like, this is what I expected to be in like the middle to bottom part of the league. I want to say I'm surprised to see Jalen Hurts so low, but I'm not. I talk about it all the time. Jalen Hurts, I think he'll get there. I think he'll be a starter in the NFL for a while, but it's because he can do it on the ground and in the air. He is better for fantasy football for sure because he has little touchdown upside. In the passing game, which is bad for his options. And he does most of his damage on the ground as a dual threat player. So it makes me very concerned for guys like AJ Brown, Devonta Smith. I'm not necessarily concerned for Dallas Goedert. I think Dallas Goedert is actually a beneficiary of the way that Jalen Hurts plays the game. And then obviously we don't know what's going on in that backfield. So the Philly backfield is just one that most people, myself included, are just avoiding completely. But the big options here are AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, right? AJ Brown is a top 10, top 11 wide receiver in both mine and your rankings. I know in the most recent ones we did, I had Devontae Smith down as my 29th ranked dynasty receiver, and you had him at your 17. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts after seeing this list that you put together. Can you still justify Devontae Smith as a top 20 dynasty wide receiver in your rankings?
I think he has to maybe get bumped down a couple spots. I don't want to bump him down out of the wide receiver two rankings because I think he has that talent, and I don't think that he is. I think he's going to be a guy who ends up moving out of Philly if Philly doesn't move on from Jalen Hurts. Um, yeah, there's a couple of guys like that. Him even like Bateman being Lamar Jackson's number one receiver, or like Jalen Waddle as Tua's number two receiver. It's like we love how talented these guys are, but turns out even if they do turn out to be the number one receiver, it ends up being better to have Joe Burrows or Matt Stafford's or one of their Josh Allen's number two receivers than it ends up being to have one of these guys, have one of their number one receivers. It's like, is AJ Brown going to produce more points than either Mike Evans or Chris Godwin this year? Probably neither of them. If they have healthy seasons, if I had to make that prediction, yeah, I'm probably going with some of these top five guys, some of their number two receivers over the number ones like Christian Kirk and like DJ Moore and well, not DJ Moore now because Sam Darnold's. Sam Darnold's not a starting quarterback, but I
Sam
mean more
Darnold better not take another snap in Carolina. I'll tell you that right now.
more like Garrett Wilson, right? Elijah Moore, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and Darnell Mooney. Even takes hit on Cole Kmet and David Montgomery. Like if Montgomery's not going to get goal line opportunities, he's not going to be the workhorse that we want him to be. So yeah, I mean, I think there's just a lot to be had. There's just how many elite guys do you see below the 15th, 16th quarterback? I can count them on my one hand. So
Yeah.
if you're looking for league breaking guys, I mean, it's almost hard to do it just by volume. We think like, yeah, we want those guys that are in those spots with great volume, but they also have to be in like really good offenses too. You'd see like Lamar Jackson only produced Mark Andrews. Tua only produced Jalen Waddle. These guys, they're getting them by high volumes, but they're not even elite. These guys are just starting options. Well, I mean, Mark Andrews obviously not, but on a points per game basis, Jalen Waddle wasn't even elite. He was a starting option as a top 24 guy, and I think he's in most people's top 12 receiver rankings right now. and he
Mhm.
just got a guy who's going to take up a lot of those points away from Tua. I think Tua is a guy who could end up bumping up maybe a couple points per game, but
Yeah, it's hard even with the addition of Tyreek Hill. It's hard to imagine Tua even bringing this up by 10 full points per game. That would actually be a pretty damn big deal. For the record, 10 points per game.
that
Uh,
would put him up to 13th right there.
yeah, which would be pretty damn good. But that's assuming that he's going to throw for an extra 40 yards and a touchdown essentially every single game. And the addition with Tyreek Hill is definitely going to help that. But at some point, you got to realize, okay, well, this is Tua. We haven't seen a shit ton out of him. Like, can we actually expect him to have this big leap forward and make it so that both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki and potentially Chase Edmonds are all viable options, right? So, definitely looking at this. Um, I'll be honest. I don't think this bumps down Jalen Waddle in my rankings in the slightest bit. But the only reason why is because you and I talked about this in one of our other videos. If Tua doesn't do it this year, he's going to get replaced, and he's going to get replaced very quickly. And with the amount of weapons that Miami has, they'll have no problem. They'll have absolutely no problem. I don't know what the quarterback free agency is going to look like this time next year, but whoever is the top option I will guarantee will sign in Miami to be throwing with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, or they'll make a splash, no pun intended, and they'll trade up. They'll trade up in the draft and grab a new quarterback. So not too worried about the dynasty outlooks for either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. Obviously, we both bumped Tyreek Hill down when he went from the Chiefs to Miami, but whatever. I do expect every single person under Tua, I think, is going to make a leap this year. I think looking at that, with the exception of Sam Darnold, but I think Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Jalen Hurts, and Justin Fields, I think all four of those guys are going to hit at least the 48-point mark this year. I wouldn't be surprised to see each one of them step into the 50 mark. Zach Wilson's situation is supremely upgraded, right? They beefed up their offensive line. They brought in 2 new tight ends. They drafted Garrett Wilson. Corey Davis should theoretically be healthy this year. Elijah Moore should theoretically be healthy this year. Like, Zach Wilson has an arsenal in front of him. And if somehow he's only putting up 45 points for his receiving options moving forward, that would be just a travesty. So I would say Zach Wilson's going to catapult up the most on this list. And this is me talking as someone who doesn't believe necessarily too much in Zach Wilson. I think it's just one of those things where I don't think he is good as a quarterback, but I think he'll be able to produce a decent amount of fantasy numbers. Jalen Hurts is going to go up just because he has A.J. Brown now, but I think it'll be probably closer to the 48, 49 range. And then Trevor Lawrence is kind of a wild card, right? They brought in Christian Kirk, like you had mentioned. They still have Marvin Jones. They overpaid greatly for Zay Jones. And they do have Chase Edmonds back, or not Chase Edmonds, goodness. Travis Etienne back there, which is going to be a very big boost for Trevor Lawrence. Plus, he's not under Urban Meyer anymore. Any statistic that anyone shows me with Trevor Lawrence after his rookie year, I just completely ignore it. I'll be honest with you, because you can't count anything against him in the situation that he was in as a rookie. So neither here nor there on that. I did want to mention this though. If we go back up to our blue tier here, Ryan Tannehill, his number is going to go down, right? Like, you can't just lose AJ Brown and expect everything to be perfectly fine. We know Ryan Tannehill's probably not the quarterback of the future in Tennessee. We know it might be Malik Willis. We know they're not going to have a high draft pick next year unless something crazy happens. What are your thoughts after seeing this list about Treylon Burks?
Well, I think it just emphasizes just how difficult it is to get to that really league winning, 18, 19, 20 points a game. You literally have to have 40 to 50% of most of your team's offense. And I don't think Treylon Burks is going to get that. I think Robert Woods is a seasoned vet. I think that they've got a couple options there. As far as guys who have just been there, they even drafted just now Hassan Haskins, who I think is going to play a role there. behind Derrick Henry and in the passing game. I think he sees some of the most opportunities of any rookie. I think him and Chris Olave are kind of in similar boats. That being said, I think I would take, Traylon Burks over Chris Olave still, regardless. Even knowing that Jameis Winston, I probably should have gone back and done Jameis Winston. Maybe we'll add that to the model. We'll go back and do Jameis Winston's last full season to see how many points he was producing, because I'm sure he would probably be pretty high up on this list. But as far as Traylon Burks goes, I mean, I'm trying when they're this young, I try not to get attached to their quarterbacks because these situations change. I mean, if Traylon Burks signed his second contract with Ryan Tannehill, he was going to be tied to Tannehill until Tannehill was 38 and done in the league, then I would put some stock into it. But for the rookie contracts, and for a team that looks like it's going to be on the decline and probably looking to revamp pretty soon, since Derrick Henry is going to be getting old. They just shipped out their number one receiver for Traylon Burks. I'm just trying to not put too much stock into it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's just such a weird situation, right? Because, we discussed this the other day. We don't think they're going to have an early pick next year. They probably won't have an early pick the year after that. Ryan Tannehill still has 2 years left in his contract, including this season, I believe. So there's a very real possibility that for at least the first 3 years of Traylon Burks' career, it's a declining Ryan Tannehill or a barely pro-ready Malik Willis throwing him the ball. And like you said, a lot of things can change between now and then. I mean, if you told us even this time last year that Cleveland was going to be the ones that traded for Deshaun Watson, nobody would have believed that, right? Like the sports book must have not have been on the sports book's radar at all this time last year after Baker Mayfield had taken the Browns to the playoffs. So it's you never know. You never know, and that's a very fair way to look at it. I will say short term, also a weird situation, right? Like Treylon Burks could potentially be completely peppered with targets this year because outside of Robert Woods, Tennessee doesn't have a whole hell of a lot going on for them. But also it's like he's a rookie. And like we just said, Robert Woods is going to command targets. Austin Hooper's there who's going to command target. They could opt to just completely run Derrick Henry into the ground this year. So he's like, Tennessee to me is like the hardest situation to project maybe in the entire league because there's just so many moving pieces. Like, I don't know, a declining quarterback, weird third round quarterback. They traded away AJ Brown for some reason. Like, I just don't know what's going on with this team, and it makes it really hard for me to project anything.
Yeah, it seems like their Super Bowl window is kind of slammed shut. If Derrick Henry can't put together a full season, or maybe not even a full season, maybe he goes into like NBA like load management, But yeah, there are so many question marks with that Titans team in general. I mean, they have their timeline is very scattered. They have a couple young guys and a couple really old guys that are going to be on their way out of there. But another one that I wanted to point out was Carson Wentz. I think he goes up from here this year. Not necessarily because Terry McLaurin is that much better than Michael Pittman, even though I think he is a little bit better than Michael Pittman. I don't think the gap is that large, but Carson Wentz is coming from an offense that had Jonathan Taylor and was just letting him carry them to the promised land. I don't think the Washington offense is going to be built that way after they just went and just got Jahan Dotson in the first round and re-signed Terry McLaurin. I think they're going to try to air this thing out. So I think Carson Wentz ends up in that like Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo range. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell which one of these quarterbacks were making their receivers and which one of the receivers were making the quarterbacks. I think most of the guys in the blue range were being made by the players around them, and the guys up in the green and the gold were are making guys better around them.
With the exception of Kirk Cousins, let's be real here.
Well, I think that Kirk Cousins, in the same way that Jameis Winston isn't a great NFL quarterback, but he's a great fantasy quarterback. I mean, Kirk Cousins, when he was in Washington, he was like, right, he was throwing for like the most passing yards in the league, and he was in the league for all that stuff. Then everyone was kind of shocked when he went to Minnesota. So I mean, he hasn't slowed up from there. I mean, he's been regularly, even at himself as a he's been like a QB 10, 11, like year in, year out. So just based off of volume and being able to throw the ball all over the field, I mean, his decisions in game deciding situations might be questionable, but he's allowed to throw to my dynasty receivers, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, if you have Kirk Cousins thrown to your dynasty receivers, that means you probably have Justin Jefferson, and you're not going to complain about anything anyway.
Exactly right.
But yeah, no, this is a really cool set of data. Definitely intrigued. I know you said you wanted to add Jameis Winston on here. We could take a look at it. I'm very interested to see the year over year change. Obviously, this tells the story of last year, right? It doesn't tell the story of this upcoming year, but if the situations haven't greatly changed or the change has been very minor, this is a very good tool to try and predict the future to some capacity. Like, is Tom Brady going to repeat 75 points a game? No, no way. With Gronk not being there anymore, I mean, that in itself is a huge factor. But Godwin's going to be out potentially for 2 to 6 games. Obviously we know he'll get a ton from Mike Evans, but Russell Gage is still largely an unproven asset, even though he did have a pretty good year in Atlanta last year. We don't know how his chemistry with Tom Brady is going to be, right? So we really only know that we have Mike Evans and then a 27.5-year-old Leonard Fournette, who's about 25 pounds fatter than he was this time last year. So safe to assume Tom Brady's not going to have 75, but this is a pretty good indication that he's not going to fall off too far, and it's still perfectly fine to own the assets that he has.
Yeah, even if he does fall off, he can fall off by 10 points a game, and he's still going to be the 8th player on this list.
Yeah.
I think it's something that we can use like in tie-breaking scenarios. I don't want to of course, like you said, you don't want to tie yourself to data like this and just freak out and become reactionary. But maybe it could be a good tool for like redraft as well. But more so just for like tiebreakers, like am I gonna go with Devontae Adams or am I gonna go with Stephon Diggs? It's like, well, I mean, I guess Josh Allen produced a little bit more per game than Derek Carr, yada yada yada, right?
Yeah.
And granted, I think this is something that maybe bodes well for Devontae Adams. I know I was down on him. You said that you might have been getting convinced by me because just a lot of targets to go around that offense. But I mean, Derek Carr is one of the top 12 guys in the league at producing points for his receivers. So if you're gonna have a stud in a crowded offense, you might as well have it with Derek Carr.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because that was something that I did mean to ask you about. I was going to say, how about Derek Carr being less than 1 point behind Aaron Rodgers? But there was an untold story there, right? Aaron Rodgers, a lot of that was going between Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones last year, where Derek Carr, a lot of that was going between Renfro and Darren Waller last year. But now you take Devontae away from Aaron, you add Devontae there for Derek Carr. You could assume Derek Carr is going to go up and that Aaron Rodgers is going to go down. But Derek Carr is already in the top 10 on this list, right? Like how much farther up do you actually expect him to go? So it's a good point that you kind of brought that one up because yes, I'm glad that you seeing this reaffirms you a little bit on Derek Carr. But I don't know. It's just interesting to look at because I know the whole Devontae Adams thing with Derek Carr has been a hot commodity between you and I.
Yeah, well, I think Derek Carr benefits more than Aaron Rodgers. What's the word I want to use? Regresses, I guess. I think it helps Derek Carr more than it hurts Aaron Rodgers, and I wouldn't be surprised if Devontae Adams added 4 points per game, and all of a sudden next year we're looking at Derek Carr who's at 67 points a game, and he's in the gold standard for us. He's in the top 6. So you never know. I mean, and that could totally be an option. I mean, he throws enough yards to where that could be an option. I just wonder how many touchdowns Devontae Adams is going to add to this offense. If he can straight up add those bunches of touchdowns that he brought to Green Bay, even if he just adds half of those to the offense throughout the season. I mean, Derek Carr, even if you look now, you look at his points off touchdowns are down at 138 compared to Aaron Rodgers' 122. I mean, if you match that difference, I mean, Kirk Cousins would be up by a lot there. He'd be up by hundred
That's
something
true.
points.
No, it's very true. And it's cool that this data kind of gives you a baseline to set up those hypotheticals, right? You can really use the new situations, the all the different what if scenarios, and you can kind of tie it all back to here, which is really really neat. So yeah, Ty, do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up about this?
I think it kind of. I mean, I guess I might be just repeating myself, but I mean, as I look through the list, I think of guys like I think Tony Pollard, I think Juju, I think Allen Robinson, T Higgins, I guess Gabe Davis, and maybe the running backs in Buffalo, all those running backs in Green Bay. I think of Adam Thielen, even Hunter Renfro, Marquise Brown, and Devonta, and what's his guy, DeAndre Hopkins. I can't believe I forgot his name. I'm looking at those guys, and I'm thinking like, yeah, those are guys that I'm probably going to be able to rely on week in and week out when they're playing to give me a lot of points. Because I mean, the difference is just so drastic. You look at Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts. You scroll up to the top. It's almost like these quarterbacks are literally almost putting up twice as much fantasy production
Yeah.
for their wide receivers. The difference from 45 to 68 doesn't sound like a massive difference, but that's about 50% more offense, 75% more offense right there.
Yeah,
I
no,
guess when you're
that's
going to get those wide receiver twos on those teams, go for the wide receiver twos that are on elite offenses. I think you have a better shot.
Yeah, and that's a big deal too, right? 38 an extra, just obviously Fields to Brady, it's an extreme one end to the other. But an additional what's that 36 points a week. That goes a very long way, especially when you factor in, Fields has Mooney, Fields has Komet, Fields has Montgomery. They just drafted Velus Jones, who I think is going to get a little bit of hype out of training camp. And you put all four of those guys together, and you're like, okay, we have 38 points to divide up between you four. Who's it going to be? And the answer is you're probably not going to be happy with too many of them. I think Fields will definitely go up past 38. Like I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't be surprised to see him hit that 48 echelon, but that's still the bottom of the list, right? It's still not this super impressive feature. So,
Yeah, I think it's more likely in an offense like that. Like, and I look at him, I look at the Eagles offense, I look at the Jets, right? I feel like it's almost more likely that, Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, they each have 10, 12 points a game and neither of them are stellar. I look at AJ Brown,
yeah,
Devonta Smith, probably more likely the same thing, maybe a couple more points, maybe 3 or 4 more points a piece, just 'cause I think they're better receivers right now, right? But I mean, they're creating those points. It's not getting created by Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields. It's more likely that Cole Kmet ends up, 7, 8 points per game. As much as I believe in him as a talent, I mean, it's more likely that he ends up being 7, 8 points. While Darnell Mooney ends up being 12, 13, and David Montgomery. I mean, we saw David Montgomery. He had one of his best years. It was as when he got 50 targets, 60 targets. And I think he's going to see those targets this year too. So, I mean, these spread offenses, and I know you've brought it up a million times, these offenses that are spread out, they're not few and far between. They're really common and they're all over the place. They're almost impossible to avoid. So I think you got to take your studs. I think the point really of this video is I wouldn't hold two guys from any one offense. I wouldn't put too much stock into any one offense in the NFL because there's
unless it's up here.
yeah, unless it's Tom Brady, and even I'm looking at like I think the best example is like if I have Jamar Chase on my team, am I actively seeking out T. Higgins? Like probably not. Like if I have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, I'm looking to move like T. Higgins for Jalen Waddle or CD Lamb or something like that. Cause it's like, I mean,
Stay
yeah,
in the same tier and maybe get an additional asset out of it. Yeah.
yeah, but just diversify, like we say. I mean, what happens if Joe Burrow? We saw him get hurt for an entire year. We know it can happen. Obviously, nobody wants to see it. God forbid. But I mean, these things happen. It's the NFL, and it's like when you're that invested, like you're not only counting on the guys to be good, you're counting on all three of them to be good. You're counting on the offense to be good. You're counting on the defense to give the ball back to the offense a lot. You're counting on the head coach. You're counting on everyone to stay healthy. You're counting on so many things when you're invested in two receivers in the same offense. It just it doesn't work out. Most of these guys that have two elite options, it's not, you can see there's none of them besides Tom Brady that have two receivers. It's all a receiver and a tight end, a receiver and a running back. Even some of them are running back and tight end. Some of them don't even have an elite receiver in their offense. There's only 12 to go around. So I think we just see that it's very top heavy when we look at things this way.
Yeah, and one more thing to point out before we go to, you notice the bottom of the list, they're all the young guys, right? These are the guys that are going to have a job while they quote unquote still prove it for at least the next 2 or 3 years. Fields, he'll play out his entire rookie contract in Chicago at the very worst. Jalen Hurts, same situation. Wilson, same situation. T-Law, same situation. Tua, we could see them move on sooner than later. Davis Mills is probably in the same situation as Tua. He's going to be on a shorter leash than the other rookies just because the other rookies were all drafted, pretty high up. I know Jalen Hurts was a third round guy, but Philly regards him significantly higher than Houston regards Davis Mills right now. I can guarantee you that. So those are other things that you really got to pay attention to is like, okay, well, their situations could improve, but also they're so young and they're going to have a job for at least the next 2 or 3 years because those teams want those guys to work out so well. You could lose production for the next 2 or 3 years if these guys just can't seem to get it together. So that's another piece of interesting data that I was able to find from your sheet here.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad you pointed that out because if you scroll up to the top, I think the only guy you see there that's the only guy you see in the top 12 that is still on his rookie contracts. The only ones are Kyler Murray, no, Josh Allen too. So Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow.
No, Josh Allen's on a second contract. I'm pretty
yeah,
sure.
Yeah. So just Joe Burrow and yeah, you're right. Actually, they did.
Herbert, Burrow, and
maybe
Kyler.
that's where I got confused.
But Kyler's going to stay with Arizona. We can basically say that he's on his second contract, and then it would be an absolute catastrophe if Herbert and Burrow were not with Cincinnati and LA in the next couple of years.
But,
so
I think you look at the weapons that these guys came into the league with. I don't think it's that ironic that you have these young guys at the top and those other young guys at the bottom. So maybe it's not time to give up on these young guys. Maybe I'm being reactionary and thinking like a redraft guy. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope everyone turns out to be fantasy gold mines. Then everybody wins, right?
No, I want to win. Screw you guys. I don't want everyone to win. But hey, Tyler, thanks for making this, man. This is really cool. We're definitely going to be adding some players to this, like Jameis Winston. I also would like to kind of track this as the season goes by. I know we're still a couple months away from the season kicking off here. But this is a really interesting set of data, and I think it is very helpful to know just how many PPR points your quarterbacks are throwing out for. So definitely a useful piece of information. And I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. So as always, like, subscribe, hit those comments, join our Discord. And seriously, we just had a second video hit over 100 views recently in our first 10 videos. And that has completely blown both of our minds. Didn't expect that, just two guys talking Dynasty. So thanks.
That's actually exactly what the Twitter bio is two dudes talking Dynasty. Right?
is it really?
Literally, I swear you can go look. But thank you guys for liking. Thank you guys for subscribing. If you guys want to comment, tell us who you think is gonna change this list next year. Tell us who you think maybe we forgot, what receivers benefit from this, what receivers maybe get hurt by this, right? I look at Mikey made that point about the rookie running backs. We see Mac Jones and Davis Mills well ahead of everyone else. Tell us how you think those guys pan out. I think that's really interesting to talk about. Maybe we could, like you said, talk about that as the season goes on, see where those guys end up grading out in their second year. But thanks for watching and hit that like button, and I'll catch you guys soon.
See you next time on That Dynasty Show.